Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kroll's Emerging Threats Weekly Brief for the 18th of May, 2026. My name is Ryan Hicks. With me today is Mark Messer and Sam Flint from the Threat Intelligence team. So today we are going to be covering AI developments of a zero-day exploit, TanStack NPM compromise, some supply chain examples affecting Claude code, an update on the cPanel vulnerability, and lastly, AI-augmented campaign targeted Latin America organizations and the finance sector. So first, Mark will start off.
Thank you, Ryan. Google identified what it believes is the first case in which a threat actor has used AI to help develop a working zero-day exploit intended for a mass exploitation event. The company said it discovered the operation before the attacker could deploy it broadly, giving the software developer time to fix the issue first. This flaw affected a widely used web-based administration tool and enabled bypass of MFA. Google withheld the name of the victim software, the actor, and the model used, which limits direct exposure assessment but underscores that admin interfaces are obviously a high-value path to enterprise compromise. For organizations, the immediate lesson is less about one undisclosed product and more about shrinking defender reaction time. Adversaries using models can accelerate discovery and weaponization of flaws in exposed management surfaces, internet-facing admin portals becoming even more sensitive choke points than they already are. This is already also a reminder that MFA should not be treated as a compensating control for vulnerable administrative software. Where patching windows, exposure, and privilege workflows overlap, organizations should assume attackers will keep testing ways to compress the path from bug discovery to reliable exploitation. Recommendations are to prioritize inventory and exposure reduction for all internet-facing administrative panels, reviewing logs for anomalous admin access that appears to bypass expected MFA flows, and accelerating emergency patching where available, and isolating procedures for externally exposed management tooling. One thing to note is that 0 days have always existed. 0 days will continue to come out. Ultimately, the best defense is proper cyber hygiene at a basic rate. We can go to the next slide. The most consequential open source supply chain story of last week is the compromise of the TanStack NPM namespace. NVD says that on May 11th, attackers published 84 malicious versions across 42 packages in roughly 6 minutes using TanStack's legitimate GitHub Actions trusted publisher binding rather than a visible rogue release process. The vulnerability database says that the actor chained a pull request target pwn request misconfiguration, cross-fork GitHub Actions cache poisoning, and runtime memory extraction of the OIDC token from the Actions runner process in order to publish credential stealing malware under a trusted identity. GitHub's advisory says that the malicious packages were designed to exfiltrate cloud credentials, GitHub tokens, and SSH keys. The operational risk is not limited to one JavaScript dependency tree, however. It extends into CI/CD credentials, developer keys, and downstream cloud access for any environment that installed affected versions during the compromise window. Defenders cannot assume that published by the legitimate workflow equals safe. In this case, the trusted publisher relationship itself became the delivery vehicle, which is relevant for organizations that have treated OIDC-based publishing as a near-complete mitigation for package hijacking. For organizations consuming open source at scale, this incident reinforces that CI integrity, workflow permissions, cache isolation, and release provenance all need to be monitored together. Signature and provenance controls still matter, but they are not enough if the build context itself can be poisoned before publication. Recommendations in this case are to hunt for installations of the affected TanStack package versions during the stated publication window, rotate GitHub tokens, cloud credentials, and SSH keys on developer or CI systems that may have interacted with said packages, and reviewing GitHub Actions' use of pull request target, cache sharing, and OIDC token handling. Thank you, Ryan, and back to you.
Thanks, Mark. So moving on, during the first sort of few quarters of this year, AI tooling is certainly becoming a trending lure and becoming quite a persistent theme for credential thefts, and this really continues in part of this story here. So in one recent campaign, starting off, attackers used a fake Claude code installer delivered through lookalike sites and also malicious advertising, and ended up stealing developer secrets through Chromium-based browsers. According to the research, the attack contains a PowerShell loader and abuses Chromium's I-elevator 2 common space to recover outbound encryption keys, and then ended up with exfiltrating cookies, passwords, and as well as payment data. A delivery is also kind of deceptive to users really, as they still receive the authentic installer. To the victim, it would appear to have kind of worked, and they receive their installer as we see a lot with these kind of malicious advertising. In sort of separate research, that's one of the first example really. There's also separate research with demonstrations of a man-in-the-middle attack against Claude's NCP integrations by silently rewriting the Claude.json file through malicious npm post install hooks. And this let the attacker redirects MCP traffic through their own proxy infrastructure and capture OAuth tokens for any connected software as a service platforms, while actively still appearing legitimate in sort of provider side logs. And these kind of examples, again, trending targeting against AI assistants, really likely due to these assistants increasingly sitting between developers and enterprise software as a service platforms. And that kind of compromise in the middle of the developer or the AI platform kind of can really expose secrets and cloud access tokens to these big platforms and kind of gaining access into the enterprise. And a few recommendations in this case. So conducting user awareness for that kind of malicious advertising piece, and also allowing or only allowing installations from approved repositories to try and encourage users or make sure they're not allowed to perhaps install or try to install these applications for themselves. Kind of having that kind of verified repository is important here. And then for the second part, kind of monitoring API tooling configuration files. So in this case, it was Claude.json, but kind of equivalent may exist. And kind of understanding and monitoring for any unauthorized changes. Consider shortening auth token lifetimes, maybe reducing the scope and the permissions of those. Again, perhaps kind of reduce the time that an actor can use those, and maybe reduce what they can do if they had that particular token. And then on the actual kind of developer side, segmenting developer environments from sensitive production environments. Of course, the kind of if the actor gets those kind of tokens, that kind of bypasses that, but really an important step, particularly for some of these supply chain, as Mark mentioned before, that kind of segmentation can provide one of the few mitigations that may be able to reduce some of the kind of risk for these kind of attacks, as well as the other recommendations here. That's all for me. I'll hand over to Sam.
Thanks, Ryan. So I have another vulnerability this week, albeit with a significant jump in severity. CVE 2026-41940 is a critical authentication bypass vulnerability affecting cPanel and WHM that is now being seen under widespread exploitation following its disclosure in late April. It's been assigned a CVSS of 9.8 due to the fact it allows an unauthenticated attacker to bypass login controls entirely and take over management panels without valid credentials, granting administrative privileges in affected systems. This removes the need for credential access or brute force activity and enables immediate control of any reachable panel. Reporting indicates large-scale automated exploitation, with more than 2,000 IPs observed scanning and targeting vulnerable systems globally. Post-exploitation activity has been broad, ranging from crypto mining and ransomware to botnet propagation, backdoor deployment, and data theft. With this activity, at least two distinct patterns are emerging. The first is linked to a cluster known as Mr. Rot 13, which shows structured post-exploitation behavior using a consistent toolkit. This includes a Go-based infector, SSH persistence, PHP web shells, and credential harvesting through login page injection, along with the deployment of cross-platform remote access tooling. The second pattern is more targeted, focused on government and military entities in Southeast Asia. In these cases, compromised cPanel instances are being used to establish persistent access, support internal network pivoting, and enable data exfiltration. While attribution remains unconfirmed, the combination of targeting, persistence, and post-exploitation compromise activity is consistent with a more deliberate regional collection effort. Some Vietnamese language artifacts were observed, although these could easily reflect deliberate false flagging as opposed to genuine operator origin. The impact is amplified by the widespread use of cPanel and WHM in shared hosting environments. In this model, compromise of a single management panel can extend into multiple hosted systems, creating multi-tenant exposure that significantly increases the potential blast radius. For organizations, this should be treated as an active incident response priority, particularly where cPanel or WHM is exposed to the internet. The pre-authentication nature of the vulnerability also limits the usefulness of authentication logs, meaning compromise may not be immediately visible without targeted investigation. The priority should be to patch or isolate vulnerable systems immediately and reduce or eliminate direct exposure of management panels to the internet. Security teams should actively hunt for indicators of compromise, including unauthorized SSH keys, modified login interfaces, web shells, and persistence mechanisms. Where compromise is suspected, panel, SSH, and downstream application credentials should be reset, and environments should be reviewed for signs of lateral movement or internal pivoting activity. Next slide, please, Ryan. And finally this week, we have yet another AI-related story highlighting how these tools are being incorporated across the broader attack lifecycle. We've already seen how AI is being used for exploit development and how it's being used as both a law and persistence layer in developer environments. Now we're going to look at how it's also being used to support and accelerate active intrusion workflows. Two related campaigns were reported this week, tracked as Shadow Ether 40 and Shadow Ether 64, targeting government and financial organizations across South America. What makes these campaigns notable isn't the tooling itself, but how attackers are incorporating agentic AI across different stages of their activity. Spanish-speaking operators were primarily targeting Mexican government entities, while Portuguese-speaking actors focused on the Brazilian financial institutions, pointing to regionally aligned activity rather than a coordinated global campaign. The attackers combined traditional tooling with AI-assisted workflows. This included using AI-linked command line interfaces connected to models like Anthropic's Claude, alongside services such as Shodan and VolDB to identify exposed systems, develop scripts, and support exploitation in real time. Rather than replacing established techniques, the AI element appears to be accelerating tasks such as reconnaissance, scripting, and lateral movement. Across both campaigns, there was extensive use of familiar post-exploitation tooling, including SOC 5 tunneling, proxy chains, SSH, Chisel, Neo-reGeorg, Crack Map Exec, and Impacket. These are supplemented with AI-generated scripts and custom backdoors, which reduces reliance on static tooling and adds variability to attacker behavior, making detection more challenging. From an operational perspective, this doesn't represent a completely new intrusion model, but it does demonstrate an evolution in how tooling is applied. AI is effectively lowering the effort required to adapt tooling, generate payloads, and move laterally within an environment where segmentation and monitoring are weaker. Strong security fundamentals remain effective, but in less mature environments, this approach allows attackers to operate faster, iterate more easily, and scale activity with less effort than traditional workflows. For organizations, the focus should be on tightening visibility and reducing exposure. This includes improving monitoring for tunneling tools, web shell activity, and unusual tooling behavior on administrative systems, as well as reducing public-facing attack surface through patching, segmentation, and credential hygiene. Teams should also actively hunt for credential exposure in files and evidence of unauthorized account creation, particularly in government and financial environments where these campaigns have been observed. Back to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Sam, and thank you also, Mark. That's all we have for this week. Thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please contact us at cti@kroll.com. Thank you, and see you next week.